everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is the event of the year. Jenny is our impartial president, so she wouldn't say let's put one event above the other, but I'll tell you it's the event of the year. We're so lucky to have Jim Markey here as a micro introduction. Jim is the principal bass trombonist at the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Some other tiny little gigs he's had include a 15-year tenure with a little band called the New York Philharmonic, tenure with the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. He is faculty at NEC. I also believe the chair of the department at NEC. So that's all just to say his reputation totally precedes him, and we're so lucky to have him here. So yeah, Jim, if you want to take it away, tell us a little about yourself and what's going on, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amelia. I really appreciate it. One of the things that whenever I get into a class, that I really like to communicate to all of you is that the idea of technique and musicianship, and sometimes we look at those as being separate entities. Well, you got the technical things that you work on, and then there are the musical things that you work on. But the way I approach it, and the way I'll approach it, I expect I'll approach it with Paul, and I think all of us can approach it. The way I approach it for myself is that they really are two sides of the exact same coin. And here's the thing. When we look at how we develop our skills on our various instruments, and since you're an orchestra, all of you play instruments, you're not vocalists. But if you were a vocalist, that would be okay. But I'm just saying, so getting back to the instrument here, when we develop our skills on our instrument, it's for a very clear purpose. And that is so that we can do anything we want to do musically, so that we're not limited by anything that we can't do on the instrument. So what that means is that oftentimes so much of the time that we spend is spent on little things and trying to do the simplest things at the highest level, because that's really where we start to get better, is when you can do one very simple task and learn how to put that task along with another simple task. Now you're starting to create the building blocks of being able to get better and better on your instrument, one piece at a time. And I mean, Dr. Suzuki, who founded the Suzuki method, many of you have heard of, some of you may have had experience in, understood this when he had this idea that all Japanese children learn Japanese. And he said, well, then if all Japanese children learn Japanese, why don't my students all have basic understandings of music? Because music itself is a language. And so his whole approach is like when you look at a child who's learning how to say something, you have your 6-month-old, they're coming out with their first words. I have 4 kids, so I'm very much immersed. I have been through this 4 times. You've got your 6-month-old child, and you say mama, mama, just waiting for something to happen. And when they finally say, mama. You say, yay! You don't say, good, now say dada. No, what do? You say mama. And you say it again, and you say it again, and again, and again. And because it's just, there's nothing that causes more joy than hearing just that one thing, and that they can do it, and they can still do it, and they can do it. And that's something that we don't think about as parents. As a parent, you just do that because it's you realize that that's part of culture, and it's like deep in the subconscious that we understand this. Music is very much the same way. When we practice, sometimes we practice until we get something right, and yet we want to practice until we can't get that thing wrong. So it's the idea of repetition, of doing something over and over and over again. That's very simple, that actually creates the building blocks to be able to develop that language, that ability to speak on your given instrument in a more effective way. But all of that is for a reason, and the reason is to be able to communicate. And likewise, children who are a year old have an extremely limited vocabulary of words that they can say, and yet a 1-year-old child understands. And if you've ever, a 1-year-old child is a child who's maybe has just learned how to walk, and maybe hasn't quite learned how to walk. That's how little they are. And yet that brain understands better than 50% of everything that's said around it. And that's a tremendous amount for a child who at that level of development is so early on, might not even be able to walk yet, and that they understand. And the reason why we learn language is to be able to speak, to be able to communicate. And that is the reason that we put all of these efforts onto the various instruments that we have, so that we can create wonderful wonderful. We can communicate so as well as we wish to. And when it comes down to what does that mean for the musician, it means that practicing on your instrument, if you would practice, you all are really, really, I'm talking to a really smart group of people. I mean, I'll will certainly say I am, probably by IQ standards, I am not afraid to say I'm the least intelligent person in this room by far. Plus, I'm a trombone player to boot, so that tells you something. But but if you would spend 4 hours practicing your instrument and all you're doing is practicing your instrument, you're missing the forest for the trees, because there's a reason that you practice the instrument. And how many of you remember the very first, you all play an instrument. How many of you remember, have ever been to a professional concert, a concert of a professional ensemble? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, a lot of people have. And how many of you remember that so clearly, that experience of going to a professional concert for the first time? Certainly, I have that experience. And for me, it was going to hear Symphonie Fantastique with the New York Philharmonic, and being on the second tier and not knowing the piece at all, having never heard the piece. You do the first movement, second movement, third movement. This is nice. Get to the fourth movement. And there was a movie that had been out at the time that I had gone called Sleeping with the Enemy. It was with Julia Roberts. But it was a thriller. But in that movie, they have the Dies Irae from Symphonie Fantastique. It appears prominently in it. So the fourth movement, I was just blown away. And then the fifth movement, I heard this Dies Irae and I said, whoa. But to hear it in context, the experience that I had from that, it had me come away saying, I want to do this. I mean, I want to do this for a living, because this feeling that I have, I want to experience this when I play, but I want to help other people experience the same thing. And that's why I do what I do. That's why I play in an orchestra, because it gives me an opportunity to cause that joy for somebody else. And from time to time, I get to feel that myself. And I say from time to time because the truth is, when you play a wind instrument, an instrument involving air, you can't afford to get emotional, because you need your air to play. So you can't be like getting all weepy and not able to have the air support that you need on the instrument. So there's a certain amount of disconnect. And I would say that when I'm on stage playing, I can invest myself maybe 70% into the music, and 30% of me needs to focus, okay, I've got a job to do. But every now and then, there are those moments that you can't help, that I personally can't help investing myself in the music. And those are the moments that I really cherish, that I remember. That Rachmaninoff's second performance I had with when I was in New York, with Simon Bychkov. It was probably back in 2010 or 2011, and it was the third movement, and I was so immersed in it, and I could barely play because I'd allow myself to immerse myself in it. It's those kinds of performances that I remember. Or the Mahler 9, when Mazel got so into the music. Of Beethoven 5, where he got mad because his cuff link on his French cuff fell out, and he kicked it across the stage, and he proceeded to conduct the most fiery Beethoven 5 I've ever seen and played in my life, because he was furious, because he had this little flag. It looked like a little white flag he was waving out of his baton arm, because his French cuff kept coming down. So these are stories that I remember, and I hope that you all, I expect many of you have those kinds of stories, whether it be a piece that you played in your own ensembles when you were growing up, or pieces that you've experienced recently playing or listening to. And that's what gets us in the room, enjoying this. So when you put it all together, that's why we do this in the first place. Now, there's a lot that we can sort of deconstruct as far as that's concerned. And I've done enough talking right now. What I want to do is open the floor to have Paul Tamburro play. And so, Paul, do you want to, I don't expect you to need to introduce yourself, but go ahead and introduce yourself anyway, and as well as the piece that you're going to be playing for us.
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you again for being here. Very excited to play for you. It's really an honor. Yeah, so I think I know a lot of people here, but I'm Paul. I am the trombonist in the Harvard-Radcliffe Orchestra right now, I think. And I'm a senior at the college in Lowell House studying archaeology and art history. And so today I'm going to be playing the David concertino in E flat. And yeah, I guess I can take it away.
Absolutely, you can fire away. Paul, why don't you play a couple notes just so we can check your sound and make sure you're not too hot and not too cold.
Yeah, that sounds good. we ran through this yesterday. I have an external microphone that I'm going to try to hook up.
Great.
So I'll plug that in, and then let me know if anything really weird happens.
Perfect. Okay.
Thanks. Okay. Well, now it's not working. 1 second. Sorry.
That's quite all right. This is we are all patient with technology, because when it works, it's great, and when it doesn't, it's and you're beholden to it. It's terrible. But while you're getting set up, it gives opportunity to tell a dad joke. I always like these. You have Zoom meetings in classrooms where everybody's gathering and everyone's on mute, so it's just dead silence. So I like to fill it with stuff. So what's the difference between an alligator and a crocodile? Well, one you'll see later, but the other you're not going to see for a while. Yeah, okay, that was bad.
Unmute and laugh right now.
I'm sorry?
I'm telling everyone to unmute and laugh, because I know everyone's laughing behind it.
Well, you can laugh because it's so bad. So, Paul, are you set up?
Yeah, I think I am. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, it says it's going through the mic, so I'll play a few notes.
Okay, sounds good. Excellent. We're all set.
Okay. All right.
Very good. Let's stop there. Nice job, Paul. Have some applause here. All right, well done. Now, you know what was really cool, Paul, was, so you got the music on your stand, right?
Yeah.
But you didn't look at it at all.
Not really, no.
Not really. I was watching your eyes, man. You were looking straight ahead the entire time. You've got that in your memory. You got that memorized, which is not surprising because you mentioned having a focus in jazz, right?
Yeah.
And I can hear a little bit of that focus in your jazz because when jazz trombone, there's generally often a different style than classical in the way we approach it. But I want to talk about some things that I think can actually, you can take with you, whether you're talking jazz or whether you're talking classical. There's a couple of things. First of all, when we play a wind instrument, I'm curious, how many brass players total do we have in the group, Amelia? I'm just curious.
Yeah, 6 or so. I think
Okay.
we have 8. Yeah, we have like 6. We have a few trombonists, we have a few horn players, we have a few trumpet players. Yeah, 6 or
Cool.
7.
So just a little thing I'll mention that's sort of applicable to every brass player, really, Paul. But particularly to you is that when we move our, I'll say that when we move our air, when we use vibrato, one of the things we try to do as brass players is make sure that the air is consistent and it's the kind of vibrato that you were using was sort of an air pulsed vibrato. And if you think like a string player, that's the equivalent of a string player using vibrato by moving their bow a little faster and slower, and sort of going wah 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 wah. And yet string players, when they use vibrato, whether they're using vibrato or not, their bow is very, very steady. And it's very, very fluid. Now, if they get louder, it goes faster. If they get softer, it'll go slower, or they'll use more pressure or less pressure. These are all things that string players think of. But if we think of our air like a string player will use their bow, that's a great visual analogy for any brass player or really any wind player. Because the thing is, we can't see. We simply can't see our air. But you can see easily someone's bow. And if you think of your air moving like the bow does, that can be a great analogy for helping you through. So that's the first thing, is just as we work together, I want to try to take away a bit of the air vibrato and see what happens when we stabilize the airstream for more consistency. The second thing I want to mention, and this is common, this is an idea that is applicable to everyone. Dynamics are much less about volume and much more about timbre. Now they affect volume, yes, but they affect timbre a lot more than they actually affect decibels. They do affect decibels, but it's much more a change in timbre. And think about it. If you're an oboe player, if you play oboe, what's your dynamic range? You're not producing tremendous amount of decibels, but yet as an oboe player, you can tell when someone's really playing soft for oboe and someone's really going for it and playing stronger for oboe. And yet, how can we tell that difference? Is it the decibels? No, it's the quality of the sound. And that's the word that timbre describes. It describes the specific quality of your sound. And the way I'll put it is every instrument in the orchestra, not every trombone sound, not every brass sound, every instrument of the orchestra observes the idea that every great sound has 3 key parts to it. And I call it the sound pyramid. At the base of the pyramid, you've got warmth, which is sort of the body of the sound. Generally, bass trombonists and tubists like this. It's the part of the sound that kind of gives you a big hug, right? But then you've got core, which gives a sound carrying power. And then you've got brilliance, which gives a sound color or shimmer or shine at the top of the sound. And it's not every brass sound or every trombone sound, it's every sound in the orchestra has those parts. Good tubists understand that they need brilliance to the sound, but tubists can have difficulty getting that brilliance. Great trumpet players understand they need warmth to the sound, but the default mode for trumpet can sometimes be to get a very brilliant sound and need to develop that warmth. In your case, what I hear in you is I hear you kind of having the same sound for everything, whether it's piano or whether it's forte. And I want to talk about how we can sort of change those dynamics. So, Amelia, would you want to spotlight Paul again? Because I think we may have lost. I don't know if you spotlighted him, but I saw him really well. But I want to. That would be awesome, because I want to be able to see you and sort of work on first of all some baseline, what it means to have these different timbres, and then go from there. So grab your horn, stand back up. You're a really good sport for taking notes, but I'll say you can. I wouldn't expect any less from somebody who's at a school for really smart people. Which, there's a reason I went to a conservatory. So what I want you to do is simply play a middle B flat at what we would say a mezzo forte dynamic. And wherever you're comfortable, just play that sound. And what we're after is a sound that's just, it's not really loud, it's not really soft. Mezzo forte means medium loud. So, kind of a middle of the road trombone sound. Let's hear you go for that. Good. Now, as you played that note, what I heard is you're putting kind of a vibrato on it. So we had a... We can use vibrato. Listen, vibrato, Paul, is a wonderful tool for musicianship, but it's not musicianship. It's a tool for it. And so what I want you to do is let's take that tool away and go with a straight tone, just like you'd be playing, say, a long tone of just going C. So using the solfege for B flat. Give it a shot. Much steadier. That was much steadier. There was a little bit of a shaking. Did you hear it? Can you try it one more time and see just how steady you can make this? If you can take that away, and once again, thinking like the string player, that bow going da, no matter what happens. Good. You have a lovely sound, Paul. Now, I'd love to hear you go mezzo piano. Play the same note, but this time go mezzo piano. Good. Now let's play it piano. Excellent. Did you all hear how Paul's timbre changed? Did you hear a tremendous difference in dynamic, like decibel level? There was a difference, but it wasn't like all of a sudden we couldn't hear him, right? But there was a big change in your timbre. That's what we're talking about in terms of dynamics. Now, let's hear you go forte. Good. And now fortissimo. Right. So now play your forte and then play piano. One note forte, one note piano. Good. That's better. Now we're hearing some differences. We're hearing some contrasts. So when you play the David, we want to be able to focus on hearing those differences. So let's get this first bar. When singers sing, or when you play, I'll say when you play, sometimes I get the sense when you had repeated notes that they sort of had this quality of going ta 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 ta. But notice how that's heavy on the, I'll say that's heavy on the noise part of the sound, and it's light on the pitch part of the sound. Ta 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 ta. If instead I sing da 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 da. Do you hear how much more pitch there is in that, and how much less, I would say, noise there is? Right. So with our first notes, with this verse, da 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 da, I want to focus on helping you get more of that pitch in your sound, and it begins with starting off with simple things. Now, for everybody, simple things are not always easy. Simple does not mean easy. Simple means uncomplicated, but simple things can be very complex. Think about all the things that goes into playing a string instrument to just play a straight note. What do you have to do? You've got to have a good bow hold, right? But in addition to that, you've got to keep that bow going straight. Well, how do you keep the bow going straight? Well, you move at your elbow. Well, is it just at the elbow? No. Eventually, the shoulder's going to go as you get to the tip. Your shoulder's going to move too, but you don't want your shoulder to move as you're halfway up. Think about how complex a task it is learning how to play just one note. It's no different for a brass player. It's the same thing. So what I want you to do is we're going to go to a G, and I want you to play your G with the same kind of forte sound that you had. It was beautiful, that good solid just by itself. Excellent, excellent, Paul. Now let's have you play a triplet, but slowly play dun 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 dum 2 3 dun 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 dum. Go ahead, do it again. Good. So what I want you to do, Paul, is what if we take the tongue out of the mix? Don't use any tongue at all. For a wind or brass instrument, there's only two things we need to make a sound. What do you think those two things might be?
Air.
Air, exactly. Air or wind, and
the lips.
the lips. Well, a vibration of some kind.
Right.
For a brass player, it's our lips. But our lips, understand how it works. Our lips cause the air to vibrate. And it's because the air vibrates that the instrument resonates. Flutes don't have a reed. They don't have lips to make the air vibrate. So how does the air vibrate? By blowing across the tone column. They actually cause the air to vibrate by blowing across the tone hole. In this case, you're simply allowing your lips to cause the air to vibrate. Of those two, air and vibration, the air is more important. So I want you to do that without any tongue and see if you can get the same body on every note. Give it a try. Good. Okay, so when you do something, Paul, first of all, did you notice how the second and third times were quite different from the first time?
Yeah.
The first time, you sort of lost some of the body on those latter notes, but the second and third time, you made a change. Now, the way you made that change, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I'm trying to sort of maximize here. What you did was you practiced in what I would call a cyclical way. You established a rhythm, and you played within that rhythm, and you allowed your body to figure it out. You knew what it is that you wanted to do. You were going to play without tongue, and you were going to play with body. But then there was a certain automatic nature that your body figured it out. And your body you heard passively that your first notes didn't have the same kind of body on each note. So the second time you changed it, and the third time you changed it. That's really important. So now let's do that same thing. But what we're going to do is we're going to change it, and we're going to use the first triplet notes of the David. Play without any tongue, focusing on every note having that same body, playing. Give that a try. Excellent, nicely done. Now let's do the same thing, but let's alternate between no tongue and with tongue. So we go rest, rest, da 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 da, rest, going back and forth. So let's get it so that with air, every note is even. Once every note's even with air, then add the tongue and see what it sounds like. you hear how much more body, how much more pitch you have on those little notes? That doesn't change going faster. We can do the same thing up at a faster speed. Give that a try. And again, air only. Yeah, there you go. You see how you're making some changes? Right? That's fantastic already, right there, just the changes you've made. Let's incorporate it with the first note now and go dun, 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 and see if we can get the same kind of timbre. Okay, nice.
Okay, with the tongue, or do you want to?
Yes, with the tongue as you are incorporating it. Excellent. Keep going.
Okay.
Timbre. What's our dynamic here?
It's piano for the next part. So
it's piano. We could use the Italian pronunciation. It's piano, right? Piano. So let's see if you can have that same piano timbre you had.
Okay. Do you want me to start from the top or?
Start right at the B flat. Da dee da dee. Okay, hold on. So you're going faster. I would love to hear you keep your tempo down so we can have the control. Da dee da 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 da. Now, one thing, Paul, music tells a story. Music is always going from someplace to someplace. We do the same thing when we tell stories. I mean, think about like the Three Little Pigs. Once upon a time, there were three little pigs who went out into the world to seek their fortune. Now, some words we highlight. Sometimes we highlight phrases, right? Once upon a time, there were three little pigs. And we go, three little pigs. And that's where we lead to. In this case, da-dee-da-da-da-da-dee-dum. Lead there. Da-dee-da-da-da-dee-da-da-dum. Because what do we do when we say sentences? We generally get towards the end and then we drop.
Right.
But if we push through, it sounds more like a question or more like a statement. So we generally don't push into our last notes because it sounds weird. So this is where music and language, as we understand it, really coincide. Give this a go again with the da dee da 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 dee. 1, 2, and 3. All right, so now that you've made it through that first phrase, you heard sometimes that you kept your timbre, you kept your consistency, you kept that body of sound you had on things, but then there were times that you lost it. Yeah. Right? Sometimes that you didn't keep it the same with the da-da-da-da-da-dum on those kinds of things. When we go for it, when we go for this evenness, it's not that it's absolutely exactly the same, but that every note leads into other notes or leads away from other notes. And let me just play a bit of this opening, the opening that you just played, to give you an idea what we can go for, what I'm trying to shoot for anyway, in this opening. Whoops. that is where doing, I mean, listen, tons and tons of practice at a really slow tempo, trying to make all those little notes even at a slow tempo, starts to pay dividends when you start to get up tempo. I'd like to jump ahead with this to the. Are you still there? Are you frozen? Is it me who's frozen or you who's frozen?
Yeah, Paul's frozen, I think.
Paul's okay. Okay, I saw some movement up there, so we'll let Paul come back to us. I was gonna say, gosh, you're looking awfully stony faced there.
My our Wi-Fi is kind of notoriously bad, and so it crashed at a very inopportune moment.
Oh no, that's quite all right. Quite all right. Not a problem at all. So okay, good, good. So what I'd like to do is jump ahead to the beat. Can you start from there?
Yeah.
Good. Paul, can you play for me that B flat that you played that was so beautifully piano? Just play the B flat. That like when you when you played those B flats that were forte, fortissimo, piano. I'd love to hear a B flat that's piano. Good. Can you go even a little bit more hushed here?
Right.
Nice. Can you play the D that starts this phrase with the exact same timbre? Do. Good. Do that again. Good. Now, let's keep going. Start from there with that kind of quality.
Okay.
Okay, good, good. Now, here, just like I mentioned telling a story before, here, this is where we're telling a story as well. Da, 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 dum. Dee, da, 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 dee, da, dee, da, 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 da. Now, rather than give away what's going to happen at the end, I'd encourage you to stay a little bit more quiet, a little bit more introspective, and let there be a quiet energy as we get to the end here. So we're here, but then we can go da 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 dim dun 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 dee, and then that da 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 dee. So lots of contrast. Once again, from the beginning of this phrase.
Yeah, I'm trying to just keep it. I'm afraid to go too soft and then have it sound really pinched at the top, but okay,
I understand.
my best shot.
But yeah, give it that. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, good. Paul, could you play that bar, the da da dum, and let's start it off stronger and put a diminuendo at the end of it. Da da dum. Yeah, do that again. It just had a little audio issues. Good. Did your sound settings change? Could you just check, see if you're on original sound?
No, I have to turn it back. Good point. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Try it again. Yeah, that's right. So now we feel that release of the phrase. We feel the release of the phrase. It's like coming to a comma. We want to hear that voice come down. That was nicely done. Now, speaking of getting into the upper register, and I know you mentioned not wanting to be pinched.
Mm-hmm.
There are two aspects to playing in the upper register. Upper register is about both strength and technique, but where technique is more important. I've seen 12-year-old children play the trumpet and play up to a high E flat. I've seen it. I've heard it. And so you can't tell me that they have any extraordinary strength that other people don't have. So what do they have? They've got good technique. When we go into the upper register as brass players, there's a natural tendency on our part for the aperture, the opening between the lips, to start to become more almond-shaped. And if I use this analogy, that we generally, so we have our aperture, it's typically, if it's typically round, which it isn't, it's not scientific, but it's sort of, this is how I describe it. If we would imagine it's round, as we get to the top, what generally happens is we can become more almond-shaped, which does two things. It lengthens the vibrating surface left to right, giving you a longer vibrating surface for that high note. And it also shortens the amplitude. It's like using a longer, thicker piano string to go for a higher note and just winding it up. Well, what are you going to do if that what are you going to get if that happens? You're going to get a dull, thick sound. So actually, oftentimes when we try to get a nice big sound in the upper register, what that winds up doing is actually making our apertures more almond-shaped like this. So what we in fact want to do is bring the side walls in. And notice what happens when we do that. When we bring the side walls in, we get more circular. We get shorter left to right and taller top to bottom. So that actually what that means for us is when we go into the upper register, to think of these muscles going this way rather than back like this, in like this, rather than giving you a thinner sound, actually that compressing can actually help open up your upper register sound and give you a clearer sound. And a case in point is if I go for a high B flat spread, I got, but if I start to bring myself in, and I'm not really working my air, I'm not pushing any harder with my airstream here, but my technique is bringing in and condensing that air into a very, very compact column. So I'd love to hear you do that on a B flat and see what happens if you allow yourself to bring yourself in. This is probably about the last thing that we're going to work on because I want to open the floor to questions and discussion. So let's have you go for this high B flat and think about bringing things in. Just start on a high B flat. See, now, Paul, you're getting a very, very clear sound, and it's very consistent with the sound you are getting lower on. Can you play this? Re, fa, si, and try to get it, try to work on getting it, keeping on bringing yourself forward and keeping the same kind of timbre? Give it a shot. Good, good, no tongue. Yeah, see, now we're talking, your timbre is much more consistent as you're getting into that upper register. Right. So I know we've talked about a lot of different things. I did a lot of talking, but I don't like to say, do this, do that. Because you all are smart and you're smart. And I want you to understand why I'm asking you to do this so that you can take this away and actually think for yourself in other circumstances how you can apply these things. So it's not just do this at this point, but really to try to give you some tools to change your playing in everything that you do. And so do you have any questions for me about things that we talked about first?
Yeah, I have a kind of tangentially related technical question, but so, sorry, let me sit down. You okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I know I mentioned earlier that I am more of a jazz player and that's where my background is. So I often switch between a King 2B and this Bach 42.
Mm-hmm.
So about a year ago, started playing a smaller mouthpiece on the Bach, which is just a Bach 6.5A, because I wanted it to be closer to my smaller horn.
Yeah.
And so I used to play a Greg Black 6G 5G, and I
Hmm.
feel that I was able to move more air and have a more open sound, and um, I like the way the sound came out with that better, but I'm trying to think about switching between the horns. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on the mouthpiece
I
question.
mean, listen, you ask a really great question, because so for those of you that just to bring you in the loop, jazz equipment, the King 2B, which is a kind of horn which what's the bore size on that? Is it like 505 or something?
I
Is the
think it's even smaller. It might be 0.498 or something.
498? Okay, so it's a small bore instrument. Um, and smaller than what we would say even the smallest symphonic tenor instruments would be, versus the instrument that Paul's playing on is a large bore symphonic instrument, which makes a pretty big difference. The amount that you're talking about, the like 50 thousandths of an inch, that's a pretty big difference. So in terms of mouthpieces, well, listen, you've got two choices. Depends on how much you go back and forth. I play bass, but I've pulled out my tenor recently because my son has started playing a tenor trombone. And what I find is that I don't play my smallest tenor trombone mouthpieces, but I do play about the last tenor trombone mouthpiece that I did play. Um, and I find that I've kind of lost, I won't say I've lost, but the ring that I used to have on my face from just playing bass is noticeably diminished. And so what I'm trying to do is make sure I focus my efforts on staying on bass, but have the ability to go over to tenor and have some experience that I can be in that mouthpiece. I think the more you go back and forth, the better you'll get, but you're going to find that you're not going to be completely comfortable on either instrument the more you go back and forth. So if you really want to be able to go back and forth between the two, you kind of need to reconcile yourself to the fact that I'm not going to feel 100% normal or 100% settled, but that's okay because I can still play. I'm sitting here. Here's why it matters. I'm sitting here. I don't ask me why, but I'll tell you why. My daughter played trumpet and she played cornet. So I'm a bass trombonist. Yet I've got a cornet here in my office. Well, guess what? If you've got a good embouchure, you can actually play a brass instrument if you got a good brass embouchure. So I can get a sound out of this thing. So I don't play this instrument. It feels tremendously uncomfortable. But I don't have to feel comfortable to play it. I can play it. With the instruments, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable than I ever would on trumpet. But you might not feel 100% comfortable. But if you get over the idea of feeling comfortable as being the thing that you're shooting for and say, I want to sound like I'm really into these instruments, that will really help you as you go back and forth. So you're asking me which mouthpiece should you play on? The bottom line is whichever mouthpiece is going to give you a setup that you say, I like the way I sound and I can manage this. And if that means playing the smaller mouthpiece that you're on for the 42, great. If that means going to a larger mouthpiece, saying I want to have more of a difference in my timbre from my jazz horn to my symphonic horn, then do that. I don't think there's a standard answer that I would say, but use your own ears to guide you on that decision, I'd say.
Yeah, I think after this, I didn't want to make a mouthpiece switch too far ahead of this, too close to this master class, but I think I may go back to the Greg Black just because I think it just feels really pinched on this smaller mouthpiece for the large horn. So
Yeah.
um,
Well,
so
then
that's all.
do that. Well, then do that. And it might be a bigger difference, but you'll get used to that bigger difference. You will. And it's not going to be like, oh gosh, I'm not going to be able to play an instrument anymore. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Anytime. So, questions from the I'm switching to gallery view, so I'll say questions from the gallery. Was that a cat, Paul?
Yeah, sorry, we have some disruptive cats in this house.
That's okay. That's awesome. I love it. I have children. You may have heard the things in the background like a touch that just wouldn't go away. I think that was somebody right up above my head, moving something across the floor. So
Yeah, so I actually have here this form we sent out. We gave people an option to ask questions. So if we don't have anyone wanting to come forward and ask one, I could ask those questions that people ask, if nobody wants to think of one spontaneously now.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So I was just curious what you're finding yourself working on now with all this free time that so many orchestral musicians have. Because I asked people all over and the answer is different from everybody. So I was just curious to hear your perspective on that.
That is a really good question. Oddly enough, you mentioned something about all the free time that we now have. I want to clarify and say the fact that I am not on stage working just means that I have filled my time up with other ways. We're homeschooling our kids. I'm an active parent and husband, helping my kids practice, teaching them. I'm still teaching my students. I'm chair of brass and percussion at NEC. I'm also chair of the players committee of the BSO. So I've got a lot of hats on. But you asked me what I'm working on. That's the heart of your question. What am I working on? So I had gone through a practice challenge, which I finished back in December. It was a 365-day practice challenge, an attempt to practice every day. What I generally find when I'm practicing is I try to gear myself up for events, schedule events that I'm going to have to practice music for, because as a performer, that's really why I practice. I practice so that I can perform. And there's one thing, to practice to get better, yes, but practicing to get better for a purpose. It's not just, I want to get better in the vacuum. It's, I actually want to get better so I can play this piece, so I can perform this piece and program it on a recital and share it with other people. So what I'm trying to do is give myself performance opportunities, whether in master classes like we're having today, or classes I've done elsewhere where I may incorporate other elements of playing. I do things like that in order to try to advance my skills and hone my skills in other areas that I might be weak. But you ask a really good question, because it can be hard to find the motivation to practice. So I try to make as much as I can the opportunities to have the motivation to practice by having things that I'm looking forward to. I'm doing a thing at a summer festival. Likely we'll be doing it from my house, but I'm still going to be performing on it. And I may very well be doing a recital in the coming months at Vanderbilt University. I think I am. So I've got things to look forward to. So basically trying to do all the kind of practicing that I would do if I were playing in the orchestra, which means sometimes practicing loud, sometimes practicing soft, sometimes practicing high things, sometimes practicing low things. Just trying to balance everything out. It's a good question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
From my forum, I have some interesting questions here. If anybody else just wants to shout out, that's cool too. All right. Okay, let's see what we got. So Jenny asks, what's your favorite part about playing brass instruments? Because they're the best. But yeah, Jim.
Oh, listen. That's a really great question, because it's not just brass instruments. I really think, in Harry Potter, the wand chooses the wizard, and the kids go into the shop and they try all the wands out, and eventually you find one that, oh yeah, that works. I totally think the instrument chooses the child. I mean, you all know we talk about stereotypes, and we shouldn't stereotype instruments, but at the same time, the trombonists, people don't play trombone because they want to be having the melody. They don't play the trombone because they want the melody. Why do they play the trombone? Because it's got this goofy slidey thing. You can make really fun noises on it. You get to play low notes. You get to play some really low notes, and that's really fun. Whereas why do people play trumpet? People are drawn to the trumpet because they like the fact that it's a bold instrument. It gets a bold sound. There's a brashness to it. Why do people play violin? Case in point, my 6-year-old started when he was 3 on violin. Well, he studied with someone who plays viola and starts kids on both violin and viola. So he had viola kids in his class. Well, he said, I want a C string. We said, well, William, you don't have a C string. You have an E string because you play violin. He said, well, I want a C string. We said, well, I mean, if you want a C string, you can get a C string, but you're going to have to give up your E string. Okay, I want a C string. You know, he was drawn to that sound. So what do I love about this? I love the fact that I never needed to be the guy who has the melody. I like being the person who's in the background, the person who gets to support other people, and who very occasionally in that job of support gets to have my moment in the sun. You know, my chance to play Tannhäuser, where I'm listening to all the strings playing these beautiful things, this opening and all the vibrato, and then I come in with bum bum dum dum. That's that kind of thing, that noble sound is probably what I love about playing trombone more than anything. That noble, you could say heroic kind of quality that it can get. That's really what I love. That's what I'm drawn to. And honestly, I started playing trombone because my older brother played trumpet, and he said, I don't want you to play trumpet, Jimmy. You need your own instrument. So I chose trombone. But that's what I love about it. And playing bass trombone, what I love is that you get all of the low notes that you can't do on tenor trombone with 100% fluidity, and you only lose about a third off the top of your register. So it really is a superior instrument.
Yeah, great answers.
Can I ask a follow-up? I don't know if you have an answer to this, and totally fine if you don't, but how in your world of instrument players have their different personalities and instrument chooses the wizard, how would you identify a flutist, besides not having lips, as you said before?
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, God. People who play the flute, first of all, they like pretty sounds, right? I mean, people play the flute. They play the flute because they don't play the flute because they want it to sound like a snare drum. They like the pretty sounds on the flute, but they also like, I mean, flutes get melodies. They get moments. They have high notes, right? They get high notes. They get melodies. They make pretty sounds. Why do people play violin? Because they like playing high notes. They like to play high, and maybe that's one of the reasons, or sometimes people play violin because their parents made them play violin. But more often, people continue to play violin because they like it. So for flute, I would say it's the quality of. I'm a trombonist, so I'd probably say go to a flute player and say, why do you play the flute? But from a trombonist point of view, I would say it's probably because it gets a pretty sound. They get to play melodies, and it's, let's face it, it's a really pretty instrument. Even when it's not played well, the flute gets a pretty sound, right? The oboe, when it's not played well, oboe does not make a pretty sound when it's not played well, right? No offense to oboe players. It's hard to make a nice sound on the oboe.
Yeah, awesome, great answers. Topher, go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking about, supporting people in the ensemble and playing with others, and that being what you enjoy about playing trombone. And I was wondering, just because we're in the absence of that right now, when you pick up your instrument every day and you go through like your routine or your fundamentals or anything, what do you think is the most satisfying part of, I don't know, how would you say, like your warm up? Like, do you just like playing long notes? Do you have like a favorite series of etudes that you cling to? Like, I don't know, Roche or anything like that? Or, what gives you the most satisfaction just like playing on your own with your instrument?
Honestly, what gives you the most satisfaction is collaborating with myself. And that might sound really ridiculous, but we have so many apps available now that you can use. You can use acapella, and I've done acapella things before. I've used GarageBand to just play things with myself. And what's really rewarding for me is just doing something like that and say, okay, let's see, I'm going to play Bordoni in third. So I'll record it and then I'll play along with it in thirds or in octaves and work on it that way. So I'm playing with other people, and it might be not the same as playing with other people, but it's more than just actually playing by myself. Now, I do like to play. I actually spent time last night. It was just last night that I was playing Bordoni Book 3 and doing some sight reading in that. I do like really making beautiful music on the instrument. There was a period that I played trombone and organ together. I still play organ. I have an organ in my apartment or in my house here, which I got, gosh, 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. And there was a time that I was studying organ very, very seriously. And I thought about, gee, maybe this is the route that I want to go. And, when push came to shove, the truth is, I really loved the operation of the organ, but I found it so limiting in terms of phrasing and beauty of sound. And so when I went to trombone, I can really express myself with my vibrato and with my dynamics and with legato in a way that I just couldn't do. I didn't get the same satisfaction from drawing stops and getting different sounds out of the instrument. So what I do now that's most satisfying is actually just really playing melodies, playing songs like Bordoni. I really find that incredibly satisfying and rewarding. Doesn't necessarily get me to do everything that I need to do in a day. So I do lots of other things besides that. But still, that's probably what I enjoy the most, besides playing with myself in multiple parts of things. So,
Well, thanks.
Good stuff. Bordoni's great. Nothing like it. I remember when I was in 6th grade, having my first lesson, my teacher handed me a Bordoni, and I still have it. It's missing all its covers. Good stuff. Yeah. Anybody? Any other questions? If not, I think I have a few to ask. No. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, not to cut you off. I think in the chat, Kathy asked, "Are you still playing the organ?" Which I think you maybe touched on, but
I do actually. I do still play organ. I don't play it perhaps as much as I might. I don't want to say as much as I'd like to, because if I wanted to play it more, I would play it more. It's not a high priority for me, but I really do enjoy it very much. So yes, I still do play.
Good stuff. Yeah, I had a couple questions. One was, I don't know if you have any advice for people who, because obviously you're professional, this is your profession, but do you have any advice for people who don't think they want to do music as a profession, but really very much want to have a way to do it frequently? Like for me, I think my ideal situation is I want to be able to be in like a casual like brass quintet with people, play the tuba. I want to keep that in my life, but I it's not going to be a professional thing. So I don't know if you have friends who are like do stuff on the side. I don't know if it's kind of fanciful to think, when you're doing a 9 to 5, you still have time for that. But yeah, if you have any thoughts or.
That's a really great question. And the truth is that if I make a living doing what I do, playing a bass trombone, but if I couldn't make a living doing it, I would still do it. I do this not in order to make a living, although I make a living doing it. I do it because I love doing it. So for people who are not planning on making a living but still enjoy it, as you do, Amelia, or as probably many other people do, the truth is find friends and make opportunities for yourselves to perform. But also remember, even though I perform, I still try to regularly go out and listen to the BSO for the very reasons that I gave at the very beginning of the class, which is that when I'm on stage and I'm actively playing, I can't fully invest myself in the music because I have a job to do, and I want to make sure that this note comes in at this time with these colleagues. Or I might be thinking about notes that I have later on, or I might be thinking about what I had for dinner that night, or what I'm going to have for dinner later that day. But when I go to a concert and listen to the music, it's a whole different experience. And so if you want to make opportunities for yourself to play a casual brass quintet, I think that's awesome. That's a great thing to do. You just need to get with people whom, keep in contact with people, make connections. In that way, I don't do much outside of work because work is work, and it's hugely enjoyable work, but it is work. But at the same time, I spend a lot of time working with my own kids, so I get a lot of musical things outside of the orchestra. So whether it be teaching or otherwise, for you, I'd say you want to do it. You should do it, and absolutely make going to concerts, make consuming performances, make that part of what you do, because that love that you have, you can scratch the itch many, many different ways. And so performing, yes, but also listening, absolutely.
Totally. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Could I ask one more question? I don't want to
Of
hog the time
course.
here. Just sitting here, I'm kind of wondering if you have, and this might be trombone specific, but I think it applies to other brass too. But do you have tips for when you have to rest for a really long time and come in? I mean, even just today, I warmed up and then I came in here for 10 minutes and then I played, and that always kind of psychs me out a little bit. And I know, as you know, trombonists were the kings of resting. So I don't know if you have tips on how to come in strong after resting for 3 movements.
Absolutely. I mean, it's some of the one of the most terrifying pieces to play for a first trombonist is Schumann's Third Symphony, the Rhenish, because you sit around for the first 3 movements and then you come in with this really touchy, extremely high passage, and you've had no warm up for you haven't played a note for 25, 30 minutes. You know, Paul, it goes back to kind of what we talked about when changing instruments as well, that if you're relying on feeling good, to play well, I'll say, if you're relying on feeling good to play well, then it's misery, that kind of thing. But if you understand that even if you haven't hit the horn, you can play. You're not going to hurt yourself, and you can play. Even if it's not comfortable, you can do it. You can physically make it happen. That's when you start to say, yeah, it doesn't matter how it feels. What matters is that I can still do this. So to build up that, sometimes what I'll do is if I have a performance coming up that's going to have a piece like that, I'll turn on a recording and I'll sit there and I'll listen through the first movement, through the second movement, through the third movement, and then I'll play along with the fourth movement. And in that case, I can say, yeah, it doesn't matter if it goes well or not for me because I'm not playing it. I'm just sitting in my living room. But chances are, if you're prepared with the piece, and if you have your proverbial ducks in a row, and your house is in order from a trombone point of view, and it's not outside your typical realm of ability to play, then when you go to play it, chances are you're going to do it. You're going to be able to play it. And so it's having that confidence that having practiced it on your own first, you can say, yes, I don't need to worry about this because I know what this feels like. I practiced that way with Bolero. There was a run that I did in the Pittsburgh Symphony of doing Bolero where I chose a moody recording with Philadelphia that's slower than 60. It's like yum da 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 dun da 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 dun 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 da 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 dun da 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 dun. And I chose that one and said, I'm going to sit here for the next 12 minutes before I come in. And then I'm going to come in and try to play it at that tempo. It was great practice because then when I got on stage, I actually, even though I was playing it by myself, I kind of felt like I was playing along with the recording. And I kind of felt like, yeah, it kind of doesn't matter how it goes because it's covered, even though it wasn't. But I still had the presence to feel, yeah, I've played along with this recording and now I'm just playing along with the recording again. That really helps me is practicing for those times where I do need to sit down and then, haven't played a note and then need to come in with well, I haven't played a note in whatever, but I don't have to play a note in whatever because I know it's there. Might not be entirely comfortable, but it's there.
Thank you.
Really, really great question. Absolutely applicable for brass players and I think wind players in general.
Any other follow-up questions? I have a couple that came to mind after that, but if anybody.
I don't know if this is a follow-up that you were thinking of, but following that, to bring a healthy dose of negativity, I was wondering if you had any least favorite parts about brass instruments. I guess this might be one of them. I don't know.
There are no bad parts about brass instruments, Jenny.
You know what? I'm sure brass is perfect and wonderful in every way.
Well, you realize that playing a brass instrument is what it is. It's you're squeezing flesh between bone and metal. That's what you're doing for a living. So, while blowing through a tube. So this is something that brass players deal with that string players don't have to. and that string players, you have your own challenges, but you can warm up for an hour before an audition or whatever, and you can go and you can play, right? It's like it's not a question of I wonder if I'm going to be able to play these notes, but for a brass player, you can easily go into an audition and say, I wonder if my face is going to hold up. I wonder if I'm going to be able to play all the high notes, because there is an element of strength that goes along with it. And oddly, for me, what I find is that here's what I don't like about brass playing. I know that when I come to a pressure event like an audition, I have to make sure not to play too much beforehand. Because if I start playing an hour and a half before an audition, even if I play for 5 minutes, once the adrenaline gets going and it opens up, there's a physiological response. The adrenaline causes those muscles, the blood vessels in the muscles, to dilate, allowing for additional oxygen flow, right? All this is happening. It's like I'm on the clock. And I can play very, very few notes and all of a sudden start to feel like I'm running out of steam. Whereas if I were sitting in my practice room, I could play for an hour and feel like I had plenty left in the tank. So for me, what I had to discover is, you know what, Jim? Don't play, pick up the horn about 10 minutes before you're going to go out on stage. And don't play any more than that. Because why do you warm up from a brass player's point of view? We warm up so that we can get additional blood flow to our lips, so we can stretch the muscles so we don't do damage. What happens when you get nervous? You get additional blood flow to the lips that causes additional oxygen that helps stretch them out. So literally I can play for 5 minutes, take a 5-minute rest, and walk out on stage and feel like I've had a completely thorough warm-up. And that's what I had to discover about myself. So the thing I don't like about brass playing is that it took me so long to figure that out for me, and that's even a thing. That's what I don't like about it. Other than that, I think it's awesome.
Got it. Thank you.
You got it. So Amelia, you had some follow-up questions to the last thing?
Yeah, no, I so when you were talking about bolero, I could not help but think of the so-called bolero trombone disaster, which is probably my there was I think it was Vienna Orchestra. They brought in some guy from, I don't know, like some Spain or something, some guy who wasn't in Vienna, and he was like super hammered, and he played bolero, and there's a recording of him playing the solo, like, and it's a total disaster, but it's also really funny.
Oh yeah, I think it goes along the lines of
Oh, gosh. Bravo, thank you. Yes, so I guess I was
something along those lines.
That's exactly it. Thank you. I guess my question was, have you ever had experienced one of those sort of anomaly moments on stage, whether good or bad? Because I know I was also thinking of one of the first concerts I went to at Alice Tilly Hall, Juilliard Orchestra, and this guy Josh Vonderheide on the percussion. He was playing timpani. I forgot what piece it was, but the mallet, the top of the mallet, bounces up and does this perfect like arc out into the audience because he was going so hard on the timpani. And that was like a cool moment, not a bad one. But do you have any moments that come to mind? Because I just love hearing these.
I mean, well, listen, for me, it was a disaster moment, and talk about shaking your confidence. It was probably 5 or 6 weeks into my tenure in the Pittsburgh Symphony, and we were doing Bartók Concerto for Orchestra. And I'd fairly just recently won the, I don't remember if it was before or after I'd taken the audition. I was in Pittsburgh first on a 1-year principal position, and then I won the full-time principal position. And we did Bartók Concerto for Orchestra, and it must have been after that audition that there's a solo for the second trombone, which goes bum ba da 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 dum. Then the first trombone goes bum bum ba 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 ba. The first time I played it I was really nervous, and in the rehearsal I played bum 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 ba ba, and the note just split up. I got a double buzz, and so, as a brass player, you've got two lips that are vibrating, and what can happen is you can get a sympathetic vibration that they're not vibrating at the same rate of speed. And so what you get is two different pitches. Well, that happened to me, and I was like, oh my goodness. Well, it kept happening, like time after time in rehearsal. And then we took the piece on tour, and it happened to me on tour, and it kept happening. And I think I had a total of 2 performances that were clean, that I didn't have a double buzz. And I had no idea what was going on. But And then you've had, and to this day, that was a great example of, I basically psyched myself out. I did something a little bit different in that rehearsal that I hadn't done in my practice room, and the practice room would be fine. And I wound up learning how to do that all the time without wanting to. And it took me going about, probably about 6 years later, I had a chance to play the piece again in a different ensemble with the Sun Valley Summer Symphony. And by that point I'd gotten over it, and I knew that it wasn't going to happen to me, but still I walked down, got on a stage for that rehearsal. I'm like, I know this, I got this. And I did have it. It was great. And I played bum, 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 absolutely comfortable. And I thought, okay, good. I can exorcise those demons. But literally, I had thought of it for years. And to let you know how powerful it is, I still think about it now, 25 years later. So I have not forgotten that experience. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. So yes, I have had that moment personally where it wasn't like, I wasn't falling down drunk, but it was one of these moments like, oh my goodness, sheesh. Okay.
Yeah. Double buzzing sucks because it's not the kind of thing that has like an easy fix. How do you stop doing that? Yeah, I've had problems with that in the past.
You're absolutely right.
Tough. Yeah, let's see what else. Any other follow-ups from anyone? I could probably think of some more, but I don't want to keep talking.
If not, that's great. It's been a real pleasure. So if you can think of anything, that's great. But if not, it's been really fun working with, I had a great time working with you, Paul, and also sort of giving you my thoughts about various things. Everybody, you had some really good questions.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I will say, so Danny submitted a question. Her fun question she submitted was, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? And I think we just had to ask that.
My favorite ice cream flavor. Well, can I say anything homemade? So I'll tell a little story. So when we go to Tanglewood each year until last year, and it was the first time we were not going to be going out to Tanglewood as members of the Boston Symphony, and the kids were not going to go to Shakespeare camp. Our daughter was not going to go to Greenwood Music Camp. And so we were thinking, oh, gee, we hope this summer isn't a real dud with everyone just sitting at home. Usually they get to go see their friends, go on the grounds, hear the BSO. None of that's going to happen. What are we going to do? You know what we'll do? We, one of the things of going to Tanglewood is there was an ice cream maker in the house that we stayed in. And so this past summer, we got an ice cream maker with double containers. And so we made homemade ice cream once or twice a week, sometimes one, sometimes two batches. And that actually made the summer. And it doesn't really matter what it is. But if I had to choose a flavor, it would be peanut butter cup. Peanut butter cup ice cream. Like that's it. And those really good, like Justine's peanut butter cups, the dark chocolate peanut butter cups you get from Whole Foods, like made with those and some really good quality real peanut butter. Oh, it's followed a close, well, a distant second, Oreo ice cream.
Yeah, that's the answer we all came here for. So thank you. Awesome. Yeah, if no one else has any more thoughts, but we've covered some good ground. Seriously. Yeah. So I mean, if that's all the questions we have, that's great. Jim, thank you so much. It's really been delightful. I mean, it's so clear, like, how, you have so much experience as a teacher, but also even like your Zoom, like Jenny and I were saying, like your Zoom fluency too. Like,
yes.
Everything just went so smoothly, and it's so, it really, the pressure is being removed from us to worry about like things going well, makes it so that we can just relax and enjoy it. So thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. That's one of the things I've actually had to learn how to do is deal with Zoom, because and the first thing you have to deal with is audio issues. So believe it or not, for my lessons, I use a service now called Clean Feed, and I don't even use Zoom audio. I use Clean Feed. So which is like a peer-to-peer connection from computer to computer, and anyway, this is great. It was my pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Really. My
Thank you so
thank,
much.
Yep.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you, Paul.
thank you, thank
Very
you,
Thank you
Maestro.
so much.
Yep.
Everyone.
Bye.
Everybody, have a great weekend.
Thanks so much, Jim.
Yep.
You too.
Bye, everyone.